between the politico-theoretical practices and stances of these two luminaries of Western Marxism, if only to show that Althusser's practice, notwithstanding its theoreticist misinterpretation by both his followers and detractors, enables us to stake out a much more militantly working-class position than Adorno's infamous theoretical melancholy would ever allow. Of course, this exercise is not supported by an exegetical mining of their respective texts, something that is par for the course in the rigorous academic debates, but something from which an interloper is exempt, considering that most academic Marxists expect no more than the dilettante and schematic forays into the realm of theory by their brethren from the world of pragmatics. One has every intention to live up to that reputation and no intention to prove oneself otherwise. So without any further ado, one would wish to rush like a fool in the direction of one's schematic construction, even as one beckons, fruitlessly perhaps, at one's angelic academic friends to follow suit. Let us begin with the negative example of Adorno. The philosopher's essay on Brecht, to cite Brazilian cultural theorist Roberto Schwartz, knows and criticizes Brecht's political aesthetic position, places greater emphasis on the work than on the theory, or rather, it sees the role of the latter inside the former. Clearly, Adorno in his reflections on Brecht hails theory as the operation of the autonomous Dionysian enactment at a moment and its simultaneous codification that in turn would enable another such autonomous enactment at another moment. Yet, in spite of that dialectical and allegorical awareness of theory in working class politics, he falls prey to the Heideggerian problem in his own practice, where he temporalizes the sense of the moment and hypostatizes it. It is a problem that is born out of having to defend the logical universality of class politics in a moment of revolutionary retreat. When the antithetical fetishes comprising the various contradictory junctures of a capitalist conjuncture are sought to be overcome by positing the universality of the singular and therefore synthetic revolutionary logic. But Adorno ended up positing that universal logic of revolutionary processuality by seeking to pedagogically transmit the conceptualized form through which he had enacted that logic of critical autonomy in the determinate moment of theory and discursive discourse onto other concrete moments of capitalist contradiction. This imposed transmission of the conceptualized form through which the revolutionary logic manifests itself determinately in the moment of theory destroyed the singularity of universality. For real universality is possible only when there is no alienated duality that implies a struggle between competing particulars intrinsic to the horizon, the capitalist horizon of alienated duality. That Adorno pedagogically imposed a conceptualized form of the universality of the one, singular universal, determinate to a particular moment on other moments, is evident in his theory of negative dialectics, that sees every act of resistance, the moment it is enunciated, as being antithetical and thus governed and articulated by the capitalist logic of competing fetishes. His negative dialectics displaces the synthetic process so completely into the domain of the absent that he cannot ever distinguish between the symptomally materialized critique of the total system in a local moment of its appearance from the fetish it is destined to become in the next moment. His negative dialectics, in fact, have no place for envisaging power or dialectics in their determinate materiality. To that extent, his vision robs the dialectical logic of the materiality that Marx had conferred on it, while rescuing it from the distortions of Hegel's teleologized and phenomenologized prism. It is no wonder then that Adorno always sees the importance of a form in terms of what it cannot say. He, thanks to his negative dialectical vision, cannot ever see that a form, in the moment of its critical emergence vis-à-vis another ontologically fixed form that affirms its logic of form as such, thereby establishing duality domination and externalized pedagogical determination, is enunciated in the realm of the positive even before it can become a form there. The figuring of such an enunciative register in the realm of the positive shows that the unalienated logic of the singular processual, which is the logical inverse of ontologized forms and thus their formal logic of domination and duality, can and does appear in the positive by breaking with the ontologically fixed forms and their logic of alienation, duality, contradiction, and domination. The melancholy Marxist, as a consequence, could never see what a form says in terms of how and why it says so. His negative dialectics, wherein the synthetic always resides in the elsewhere of the negative and the absent, actually implies that this elsewhere of synthetic negativity appears only in the mental moment of human thought. The hypostatization of the form in which the processual synthetic logic appeared in a determinate fashion to the mental theoretical moment, something that was built into Adorno's temporalization of the sense of the theoretical moment of class struggle, made it impossible for him to envisage the unfolding of the processual synthetic logic, which was constitutive of the form of the critique, determinate to the mental theoretical moment through its repeated determinate reenactment in the specificity of other moments of capitalist duality and contradiction. It was this that led Adorno's theoretical practice into the direction of radical negativity that precluded all revolutionary hope and made optimism of the will an impossibility. Adorno, even while being critically inactive in the theoretical moment of institutionalized academics, turns pedagogical in taking the conceptualized form of that enactment rather literally with regard to other moments, especially the moment of political pragmatics, of capitalist duality and contradiction. That, in the end and now, brings us to Althusser, whose project of doing philosophy in the negative, or philosophy under the condition of politics, gave us a revolutionary metaphysics that obviated his theory's pedagogical reception and made the reenactment and refoundation of the logic of unalienated processuality, which was constitutive of his form of critique in the moment of theory and canonical philosophy, inescapable. Althusser's defense of the revolutionary horizon, as it is encapsulated in a conceptually elevated form, through which critique and the coeval logic of unalienated processuality were enacted at the moment of philosophy, is simultaneously a call for reenactment. The fact that they are not discrete ideas renders Althusser's and Badiou's notion of philosophy as anti-dialogic combat only quasi-Stalinist, a stance that working class politics must today perforce adopt. Thank you.
You note on the one hand that the insurgency is little more than a series of sensational strikes persistently launched by the Maoist PLDA and the people's militias in their areas of dominance is symptomatic of the retreat of the working class revolution. You also talk about this a few lines later in somewhat disparaging terms. In other words, that you don't like, presumably the comment that is being made, since you put it in quotation marks, that revolutionary project by the infantile left-wing communism of the Maoists.
See, that is a criticism that is often ascribed to them, which is why I kept it. I didn't know how to actually put it, because double quotes would ascribe it to Lenin and it would make as if I am using Lenin's criticism. But here my purpose is actually to state that it is not a disparaging commentary. It is to basically tangentially criticize the disparagement that is often heaped on them, even as I maintain my critique of the Maoists, which is there in the earlier position that you have mentioned.
Can you locate yourself more precisely?
Okay. I think that as far as various groups, and which includes the Maoists, are concerned, they are basically, and here I use the word sects, not in a negative sense, it doesn't have a negative connotation, but in the sense of a certain sphere or a moment of experience. So my entire argument is to go back to the Maoists, that in the agrarian tribal location, the Maoists have enacted the entire processual logic, right? But the only way that that processual logic can now unfold into other locations, which is the location of the industrial worker, the location of the white-collar worker, various socio-occupational, geographic, temporal moments or locations, the only way it can unfold is not by an overgeneralization of the form, which is the agrarian tribal form in which this singular working class logic has emerged in the agrarian tribal location, but only in an allegorical register, which is to say this logic can only be received inactively and can only be enacted, not in a pedagogical fashion, it can only be reenacted in the formal specificities of these movements. So there's a difference that I make between generalization and overgeneralization. Generalization is basically this allegorical grasping, and there is a dialectics involved. The allegorical grasping of the logic, the singular logic that is being enacted by the Maoists at their agrarian tribal location. But my problem is that to say either ways, because I really think that the problem that we face today is not a problem of the Maoists alone, Maoists as a group. It is a problem of the entire working class movement. And my criticism of the Maoists is as much a criticism of all the other various groups or locations, which includes mine own. So that is how I would roughly place myself. I think that has not been an equivocal or an ambivalent answer, I suppose.
We can probably pick it up in discussion. Right. Can I ask the second question very quickly, which is, on page 4 of your text, you say they clearly content themselves by restricting their politics of critique to the theoretical movement, even as they refuse to accept the fact that the form in which their critical politics has emerged in the academic movement clearly self-reflexively tries out to be unfolded through reenactment of the constitutive processual logic of that theoretical form of critical politics into the messy moment of political pragmatics. Which, if I was to put it crudely, is essentially saying there is a certain theoretical, shall we say, impetus which needs to be also realized in the messy world. I'd like from you some ways in which your own theoretical formulation can be actually, or formulations can be manifested in this messy world.
Okay. First is basically it is, I would want to sort of, your question actually reminds me of a thing that I have encountered off and on, which is this French Marxist Henri Lefebvre writing this book called The Explosion, which he wrote in the heat and in the aftermath, immediate aftermath of May 68. It's called Explosion, Marxism and the French Upheaval, where he comes up with a very interesting and I would say a very accurate phrase, where he says that the revolution always lags behind itself. So as you can see, when I begin my paper and I give this Hegel's quote, The Owl of Minerva, I also say that thinking is not merely a post facto cognition of the event. Thinking is not about the event. Thinking can also be the event itself, even as it anticipates once again the return of that same event and its reenactment in another moment. So what I'm basically saying is, if you were to consider the university as a site of struggle, we see that these three levels that I have spoken about in the university, the level of control of the university in general, the restructuring of the pedagogical relations, and then this whole question of theory itself, they're only conceptually discrete, they're constantly unfolding into one another. So if one knows what it means at this formulation of academics beyond academia, it does not merely mean theoretical class struggle. It immediately therefore will mean, the moment it happens, if it starts happening here, that it has to unfold. It has to unfold into another moment. And even when you take control of the university, it would have to mean that it has to unfold finally in terms of engaging with, critically and oppositionally, with this larger structure called bourgeois economy. Because finally, what is the point if students and teachers take control and pretty much start doing the same thing that the Vice Chancellor is doing? I mean, it is basically a question, as Adityan put it, of self-determination. Now, self-determination, the problem that I have with that term is that it sort of sometimes seems to suggest a kind of fixity of the self. But if we were to understand the self as an event that is constantly unfolding and enacting itself, then I would say that basically the moment you take administrative control of the university, there is a need for yourself to once again enact itself in its eventual sense, which is to constantly strive for this autonomous position, which can only happen through critique. That autonomous position is not given. As Marx repeatedly said in German ideology, that science only emerges through working class struggle. The truth is not an absolute, it is only in a critical register that it occurs. So what I'm basically saying is that this is how it can unfold. This is a conceptualization and encapsulation of this totality and how it can unfold. And which is why I have a slight quibble with merely calling it a theoretical moment of class struggle.